Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. In this podcast, we are going to go into part 3 of the 2023 National Electrical Code. We've done parts 1 and 2, and now it's on to part 3, disconnecting means. But before we go any further, I just want to remind you, if you want to dive really deep into all this stuff, check out some of my classes or some of my workshops. You can go to Solar, S-E-A-N, that's solarshawn.com. Now we are hitting it, part 3, disconnecting means of the National Electrical Code. And so now the idea is to turn this code into poetry so it is more enjoyable and more memorable. 690.13 Photovoltaic Systems Disconnecting Means. Means shall be provided to disconnect the PV system from all wiring systems, including power systems, energy storage systems, and utilization equipment and its associated premises wiring. So what we're kind of talking about here is the PV system is going to be able to be separated from all other systems. And it used to not be that way. So back in the day, it used to be that batteries could be part of a PV system. And now they are separate systems. And so now we need a separate PV system disconnecting means. Because this thing is only for PV. It's not for storage. It's not for loads or anything like that. So let's get on into it. Now we're looking at 690.13a, location. And then we get into A1, readily accessible. The PV system disconnecting means shall be installed in a readily accessible location. Kind of obvious, so we can get at it. What's the use of having a disconnecting means if you can't even get to it? 690.13a2 is enclosure doors and covers. Where disconnecting means for circuits operating above 30 volts is readily accessible to unqualified persons, an enclosure door or hinged cover that exposes energized parts when open shall have its door or cover locked or require a tool to be open. Now we are at 690.13b, marking. Each PV system disconnecting means shall plainly indicate whether in the open, off, or closed, on position and be permanently marked. PV system disconnect. That's capital letters too there. Or equivalent. Additional markings shall be permitted based upon the specific configuration. For PV system disconnecting means where the line and load terminals may be energized in the open position, the device shall be marked with the following words or equivalent. Warning: electric shock hazard. Terminals on the line and load sides may be energized in the open position. This warning sign or label shall comply with 110.21b. Little commentary from Sean here. Most of the time, you don't need this sign where it says line and load energized in the open position, because a lot of times the PV system disconnect is an AC circuit breaker or an AC disconnect. And on the AC side of an interactive inverter, it immediately shuts down on the inverter side because of anti-islanding, so you don't need this sign in that location. So most of the time, you don't need the line and load side for the PV system disconnect if it's an interactive disconnect. 690.13c is maximum number of disconnects. Each PV system disconnecting means shall consist of not more than 6 switches or 6 sets of circuit breakers, or a combination of not more than 6 switches and sets of circuit breakers mounted in a single enclosure or in a group of separate enclosures. A single PV system disconnecting means shall be permitted for the combined AC output of one or more inverters or AC modules. How's that for some feeling there? Informational note: this requirement does not limit the number of PV systems connected to a service as permitted in 690.4d. This requirement allows up to 6 disconnecting means to disconnect a single PV system. For PV systems where all power is converted through interactive inverters, a dedicated circuit breaker in 705.12b1 is an example of a single PV system disconnecting means. So some commentary here again. One of the things about this maximum number of disconnects, it really doesn't come into play that often. So don't worry too much about this one. 690.13d ratings. The PV system disconnecting means shall have the ratings sufficient for the maximum circuit current, available fault current, and voltage that is available at the terminals of the PV system disconnect. Kind of obvious there. 690.13e, type of disconnect. The PV system disconnecting means shall simultaneously disconnect the PV system conductors that are not solidly grounded from all conductors of other wiring systems. The PV system disconnecting means or its remote operating device or the enclosure providing access to the disconnecting means shall be capable of being locked in accordance with 110.25. The PV system disconnecting means shall be one of the following. And then we've got 690.13e 1 through 5. 1. A manually operated switch or circuit breaker. 2. A connector meeting the requirements of 690.33d1 or d3. 3. A pull-out switch with the required interrupt rating. 4. A remote-controlled switch or circuit breaker that is operable locally and opens automatically when control power is interrupted. And 5. A device listed or approved for the intended operation. And an informational note here, circuit breakers marked line and load may not be suitable for backfeed or reverse current. And off to 690.15, disconnecting means for isolating photovoltaic equipment. So 690.15 folks here, we're talking about isolating devices. And by the way, folks, this can also be something like a connector on the back of a module. So let's get into it. 690.15, disconnecting means for isolating photovoltaic equipment. Disconnecting means of the type required in 690.15a shall be provided to disconnect AC PV modules, fuses, DC to DC converters, inverters, and charge controllers from all conductors that are not solidly grounded. 690.15a type of disconnecting means. Where a disconnect is required to isolate equipment, the disconnecting means shall be one of the following. We've got 1, 2, and 3 here of 690.15a 1, 2, and 3. 1. An equipment disconnecting means in accordance with 690.15c. 2. An isolating device as part of listed equipment where an interlock or similar means prevents the opening of the isolating device under load. And 3, for circuits with maximum circuit current of 30 amperes or less, an isolating device in accordance with 690.15b. And here it is, 690.15b, isolating device. An isolating device shall not be required to have an interrupt rating. Where an isolating device is not rated for interrupting the circuit current, it shall be marked do not disconnect under load or not for current interrupting. An isolating device shall not be required to simultaneously disconnect all current carrying conductors of a circuit. The isolating device shall be one of the following, and here we go. We have 4 different of the following for isolating devices. That's going to be 690.15b 1 through 4. 1. A mating connector meeting the requirements of 690.33 and listed and identified for use with specific equipment. 2. A finger-safe fuse holder. 3. An isolating device that requires a tool to place the device in the open-off position. And 4, an isolating device listed for the intended application. And now we are on to 690.15c, equipment disconnecting means. Equipment disconnecting means shall comply with the following. And the following is 4 different things plus a little commentary at the end of that. So these are the 4 things about our equipment disconnecting means. 1, have ratings sufficient for the maximum circuit current, available fault current, and voltage that is available at the terminals. 2, simultaneously disconnect all current carrying conductors that are not solidly grounded to the circuit to which it is connected. 3, be externally operable without exposing the operator to contact with energized parts, and shall indicate whether in the open off or closed on position, where not within sight or not within 10 feet of the equipment, the disconnecting means or its remote operating device or the enclosure providing access to the disconnecting means shall be capable of being locked in accordance with 110.25. And number 4 is be one of the types in 690.13E1 through E5. And here's a little bit of equipment disconnecting means commentary below 1 through 4. And it says equipment disconnecting means other than those complying with 690.33 shall be marked in accordance with the warning in 690.13b if the line and load terminals can be energized in the open position. And so that's something that you can be seeing on the DC side when you open something up, and you might have voltage on both sides after something's been turned off on the DC side. A lot more common there. We don't see DC anti-islanding, do we? And now some informational note. A common installation practice is to terminate PV source side DC conductors in the same manner that utility source side AC conductors are generally connected on the line side of a disconnecting means. This practice is likely to de-energize load side terminals, blades, and fuses when the disconnect is in the open position and no energized source circuits are connected to the load side of the disconnect. You like my informational note accent? Just came up with that today. Okay, and now we are on 690.15, which is disconnecting means for isolating photovoltaic equipment, and we're looking at 690.15D, location and control. Isolating devices or equipment disconnecting means shall comply with one or more of the following. And we've got 1 through 4, plus 4 has an A and a B, and that's for location and control for these disconnecting means isolated devices things. 1, located in the equipment. 2, located in sight from and readily accessible from the equipment for those to whom access is required. And 3, lockable in accordance with 110.25. 4, provided with remote controls to activate the disconnecting means where the remote controls comply with one of the following. And that's where we have the A and the B for 4. And the 2 following here says the disconnecting means and their controls are located within the same equipment. And then we have B, the disconnecting means is lockable in accordance with 110.25, and the location of the controls are marked on the disconnecting means. So remember, that was the location and control of the equipment disconnecting means. It just has to be one or more of those. So that takes us to the end of this podcast. And I hope you enjoyed Part 3, Disconnecting Means of the 2023 National Electrical Code. So thanks for listening to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. To find out more, go to Solar, SEAN, that's SolarSean.com, and check out all these different classes that I have on HeatSpring. You can go to heatspring.com/Sean, check out my classes there. You can have your company hire me to come do talks, National Electrical Code talks, workshops, 5-day classes, 2-day classes, 1-day classes, any kind of prime number of classes too. I can do that. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. So check it out.